Hey everybody. It is like 4 degrees outside and dropping fast. No one's going anywhere today. So I'm taking this opportunity to record this quick little mini lecture about mechanics, dynamics, and aesthetics. I did not originally plan to have a lecture on this topic, but on review of the materials for this year, I feel like maybe it's warranted just to do a quick one. There's not even any actual slides for this, so feel free to just listen to it while you play Cookie Clicker, maybe. That would be a great way to multitask for your homework for this level. But I wanted to just give a quick tour of the mechanics, dynamics, aesthetics framework as it applies to games for learning and to instructional design. We're going to be doing a lot in this course of um, importing and comparing design models and frameworks from the game design field and from education and instructional design. And so I think it's useful here early on to talk a little bit more about the relationship between those two perspectives and how they come together, and how that can be useful in a course like this. So, if you haven't already, take a quick look at the mechanics, dynamics, aesthetics paper here in level one. Um, and what you will see as you read through that is it's a design framework for trying to relate the perspectives of designers on the one hand and players on the other hand, um, around when talking around the design of games and why they work in the way that they do, because a designer and a player have very different experiences of a game, even though it is fundamentally the same game system they're both talking about. And in a very similar way, I believe, to how teachers on the one hand and learners on the other hand can have very different experiences of a class and of a curriculum. But we're all talking about the same stuff, and some, I think, of the problems that we encounter sometimes in our work are when you have people kind of talking past each other, because one person is coming from a teaching perspective and one person is coming from a learning perspective, and they think they're saying the same things, but they're actually talking about they've got two very different lenses on what they're talking about. And that can impede communication, can lead to frustration, um, all of that stuff that if you haven't encountered that, maybe you're just a better educator than I am. Maybe you're just new. Um, we'll find out, I guess. Only 40 years to go, guys. So anyway, mechanics, dynamics, and aesthetics. Mechanics, let's just talk about them in terms of how you might understand them from a teaching perspective. So mechanics are all of the background work, all of the underlying work that ideally the students and the parents, and to some extent admin doesn't really see and doesn't need to be aware of. Um, in this context, we're just using the word mechanics, but this also encompasses the other elements we talked about in lecture number one, the rules and the goals, what I would broadly class as magic circle stuff. And the way you can tell it is magic circle stuff is that the players or the learners don't notice it unless it goes wrong. So that is sort of my working off the cuff definition. So this is lesson planning, this is assessment, this is tracking and data and all of that background work, and also like classroom setup, like the physical layout of your classroom, putting up your decorations and your infographics and your all that, all of these things that students come in and they might interact with them every day, but they're not like consciously aware of them in the way that you, as the person who sets them up and maintains them, are. So that's the mechanics piece, is not just mechanics in our working definition, but also rules, goals, magic circle stuff. Then the dynamics are the day-to-day activities of the classroom. So dynamics would be what actually happens in a, a given class. Um, we often frame learning outcomes in terms of dynamics. Students will be able to, and then you describe what Bloom verb they are going to do. Those are observable real world events. Um, ideally, obviously, it can be hard to observe some of those Bloom words directly. But so that's the dynamics. And then the aesthetics is the overarching experience, the overall community that you build in your classroom, the overall understanding of the content and the sense of the subject area that you are constructing, and not just you at this point, but everyone in your classroom, teachers and students, are collaboratively constructing throughout a school year. That is the aesthetic layer. The social, the intellectual, the community, all of that is aesthetics. So that's a quick and dirty summary of what mechanics, dynamics, and aesthetics look like when we apply them to instructional design. Now, why is this useful? Well, one thing that I think this model is really, really good at, and that's exemplified in a couple of the other readings from this section, is it gives you two directions to start from. Now, Hunicke and co-authors in the original MDA paper kind of position the designer as having a mechanical perspective and starting from this side over here and working from mechanics towards aesthetics. And I think that that's a very fair framing in many ways, but you can actually go from the other direction as well. And so what I mean by that is that you can start out with at either end of this continuum, and you say, I've got a mechanic either that I want to use or that I have to use because I'm required to it, like I am required to assess and grade in this certain way, or I want to assess students in this certain way. So that's the mechanic where I'm kind of setting up what the inputs and outputs of my learning environment are going to be. And then you can start from there and discover through the design process and experimenting and fine tuning what or aesthetics that mechanic is going to produce in practice. You can observe what dynamics emerge as students interact with this concrete piece of your design, and then what the overall aesthetic experience, the takeaway that they actually remember at the end of it all is based on that. On the other hand, you can start from the opposite design direction. Say, here's the aesthetic I want. I want to foster an aesthetic of teamwork, or I want to foster an aesthetic of independent inquiry. You define in whatever way makes sense for you in your classroom what you want that take-home experience that students will remember years from now to be. What is that aesthetic? And then, as a designer, you go looking for the mechanics that are going to deliver that most effectively in your classroom. So you want to have a class that revolves a lot around teamwork and collaboration. Okay, what mechanics are going to work towards that to support the dynamics and ultimately the aesthetic that you want? And what mechanics are not going to work well? For example, like if you're pitting students against, if you're fostering competition through class rankings or some other mechanic where students are like directly competing with each other to win, that is going to not um, be very compatible with an aesthetic of teamwork and collaboration if that's what you're trying to implement. And so that would be the kind of mechanic you would want to avoid in that case. And you would want to find mechanics that actually support your desired aesthetic. So Throughout this course, you're going to have these design challenges and you're going to be analyzing existing games and also brainstorming your own original gamified or game-based learning designs. And these are two directions that you can start from. They're both equally valid. They both have different strengths and affordances and weaknesses at the same time. So it'll depend on the precise nature of the challenge you're taking on and the precise nature of what you are trying to design, which one of these is going to be appropriate for you in any given moment. But starting with mechanics, and like I said, this is sort of exemplified by some of the other readings. So I would characterize the zombie division paper by Alevin et al. As starting from this perspective. They really get down in the nitty gritty of the mechanics and do a lot of work to establish not just the game mechanics, but also the underlying mechanics of learning that they are aiming at in building this serious game about fighting mathematical zombies and needing to use the correct weapon to divide the number the zombie is wearing into a whole divisor. So they're starting from a mechanics end of things and then discovering in the course of building and testing this game what kind of aesthetics it is delivering and reporting on that in their paper. Then the other paper in this section from James Paul G, his research involved naturalistic observation of children playing games and learning in real world environments. And so what he is doing is he's describing the aesthetics and sometimes the dynamics that he was observing in those naturalistic environments. And what was going on. He's describing starting at the aesthetic level and then kind of trying to pick apart and extrapolate backwards down to the mechanics that are actually at play that create those observable real world dynamics and aesthetics that make up his list. So either of these is a totally valid approach to these questions of learning and these challenges of instructional design. It just depends on what you're starting from, what your goals as a designer are. Are they in terms of those underpinning inputs and outputs that this is what you've got to work with, and you're trying to figure out how to build it up into an overall picture, or is it starting from a desire to foster a particular kind of aesthetic and then working backwards from there to figure out which mechanics and inputs and outputs are going to get you and your students there? So that is just a really quick overview of MDA as an instructional design framework. Hopefully, at the very least, you clicked a bunch of cookies while I was talking just now, and so you at least got that much out of this. Um, if you have any questions or thoughts, there are several opportunities here in level one for you to give feedback on the MDA framework or the way that I have tried to present it just here. So I look forward to hearing from you in the forums.